The kettle screamed before the morning did. I forgot I had put it on. My hands were shaking again. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe it was the thought that today would decide whether I could keep my home. I am 72 years old, and every day feels like a negotiation with time. The house creaks like my knees. The walls breathe with me when the wind passes through the cracks. I tell myself that this is the price of memory, that old wood should sound alive. On the table lay the bills, stacked neatly, silent but heavy. Property tax. The letter had come a week ago, and I had read it so many times that the paper had begun to soften at the edges. The words never changed: pay by the end of the month or lose the house. The house my husband built in 1973 with his own hands. I opened the drawer and took out a small envelope, yellowed by age. Inside were the bills I had collected over months, dollars from sewing, coins from babysitting, tips from washing laundry for the families around the block. Each one carried a story, a small piece of my life. I counted again, whispering the numbers to make sure I had enough. When I reached the last one, I smiled faintly. It was enough, just enough. I said it out loud as if the walls needed to hear it too. It will be enough. The sunlight was shy that morning. It slipped through the curtains in narrow lines that touched the floor like ribbons of gold. I poured tea into a cracked cup and sat quietly. The silence was comforting until the ticking clock reminded me that silence costs time. There was a photograph on the table. My husband, in his uniform, smiling with the confidence of a man who believed hard work would always protect what he loved. He died believing that. I pressed my fingers to the glass. I am still keeping the house, I told him. Outside, the neighborhood was just beginning to wake. Children shouted somewhere down the street, and a dog barked at the sound of a garbage truck. I put on my coat, the one with a missing button, and tied a small scarf around my neck. My reflection in the mirror startled me tired eyes, silver hair that refused to stay down, lips that tried to smile but never quite managed. Before leaving, I checked the stove twice, locked the door, then locked it again. Habit. Fear. Both. Maybe. I slipped the envelope of money into my handbag, pressed it close to my chest, and whispered a small prayer I had learned from my grandmother. Let today be gentle. The walk to the bus stop was longer than it used to be. My cane clicked against the pavement in a rhythm I had come to accept as music. The sky was pale, almost white. People passed me, walking faster, talking louder, their lives a blur of purpose. I envied their speed, not because I wanted to hurry, but because it meant they had somewhere to be without fear. When I reached the corner, I stopped to rest. My breath came in small clouds. The bakery across the street opened its door, and the smell of warm bread filled the air. I smiled at the memory of the mornings when I could still bake without pain in my hands. The bus arrived with a sigh of air, old and tired like me. I climbed aboard slowly, holding the rail as the driver nodded politely. I found a seat near the window and placed my bag on my lap. The city moved outside, ordinary and endless. I thought of the house again, the chipped paint on the porch, the rose bush that refused to die, the sound of rain on the roof at night. Every part of it carried the weight of years, of love, of survival. I could not lose it, not to numbers on a letter. As the bus rolled forward, I traced the window with my fingertip and let the memories fade into the hum of the engine. The road ahead shimmered in the morning light, full of noise and promise, and somewhere in that promise was a stranger waiting, though I did not yet know it. I closed my eyes for a moment and whispered to myself, "It will be a simple day. I will pay what I owe, and then I will come home." The bus turned toward the center of the city. Buildings rose like giants, casting shadows that seemed to follow us. I held my bag tighter. The envelope of money felt heavier than before, as if it already knew how the day would test me. When the bus stopped again, I saw the tall glass of the bank across the street. Its doors gleamed in the sunlight, inviting but cold. I waited until the crowd cleared before standing. My knees ached, but I ignored them. I stepped down, careful not to stumble, and stood there looking at the building. It looked nothing like the world I belonged to. And yet, this was where I had to go. I took a breath that tasted like fear and whispered, "One step at a time." Then I crossed the street. The bus door hissed open with a tired sound, and I stepped inside. The driver nodded, his eyes kind but distant, the way people look at someone they have seen 100 times but never really noticed. I found my seat near the window, second row from the back, where the sunlight always managed to reach me even on cloudy days. The city was already awake. Children in uniforms laughed near a corner store. A man in a gray suit shouted into his phone, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from somewhere I could not see. I pressed my bag against my knees, feeling the rough paper envelope inside. It was all I had, and it needed to be enough. The bus jolted forward, making a sound like a sigh, and I felt my balance shift. A young woman sitting beside me smiled faintly. She had earbuds in, her music leaking softly into the world between us. It was a tender sound, like something hopeful. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked when she noticed me holding the rail too tightly. I smiled, embarrassed. "Just a little nervous. I am going to the bank today." She nodded kindly. "I hate banks too." Quote. We both laughed quietly, strangers sharing a small truth. When she got off at the next stop, she turned and waved. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt like a blessing. I whispered a thank you after her, though she could not hear it. The bus continued down Main Street. I watched the shops past the flower store with fading petals in the window, the barber shop where men gathered to talk about sports and politics, the diner that still had the same red stools from 1978. The world kept moving, but parts of it had never changed. Maybe that was why I loved this city. It remembered even when people forgot. Every turn of the wheels seemed to echo the rhythm of my heartbeat. The envelope inside my bag grew heavier with every block. I thought about the letter again, about the house, about the nights I could not sleep, because I feared a knock on the door from someone demanding what I could not pay. I told myself this was the last time I would feel that fear. Once I made the payment, I would rest easy. I repeated it in my head like a prayer. After today, there will be peace. A group of teenagers got on at the next stop, loud and full of energy. They carried backpacks and dreams that had not yet been bruised by time. Their laughter filled the bus. I smiled at their noise, even as I held my bag a little tighter. Not because I distrusted them, but because life had taught me to protect what little I had left. Outside, clouds began to gather, soft and gray. A light drizzle tapped the windows, tracing paths of water that blurred the city into watercolor. The smell of rain mixed with exhaust and metal, and for a brief moment, I felt something like calm. The sound reminded me of my husband hammering nails on a rainy morning, building the porch that still stood today. The road grew smoother as we entered downtown. Glass buildings rose like mirrors of another world, a world made for people who never carried fear in their pockets. I saw my reflection in the window small, lined with years, but still steady. I whispered, "You have made it this far. Do not turn back now." The bus stopped at a red light. On the sidewalk, a man in a dark coat handed a newspaper to a stranger. The way they looked around before exchanging it made me uneasy, but maybe that was just the city. Every corner held a story I did not need to know. The light turned green, and we moved again. I counted the stops. 2 more, then the bank. My stomach tightened. I took a slow breath, watching as people entered and exited the world outside with confidence I envied. At the next stop, an old man boarded. He had a weathered face and eyes that seemed to carry both sorrow and wisdom. He sat across from me, nodded politely, then looked out the window. For a moment, I imagined that maybe he too was heading to settle some long unpaid debt. Not just of money, but of life itself. When the bus neared the corner of Fifth Avenue, I reached up and pulled the cord. The small bell chimed. My heart felt like it had learned that sound long ago, the way it marked endings and beginnings all at once. The bus slowed, brakes whispering against the wet road. I stood carefully, gripping the pole until it stopped completely. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "Take care, ma'am," he said. "I will," I answered softly. I stepped down, the rain now only a mist, gentle but cool. The street shimmered under the weak light. Cars passed, their reflections bending across puddles. The smell of wet asphalt filled the air, sharp and real. Across the intersection, the bank stood tall, its glass doors reflecting the gray sky. It looked clean, sterile, and unkind. A place built for numbers, not for people like me. I waited for the light to change, clutching my bag. The world felt suddenly quiet. Even the rain seemed to pause. In that stillness, I felt a strange awareness, as if time itself was holding its breath. When the signal turned green, I crossed the street. My steps were small but steady. The doors of the bank loomed ahead, and I could see my reflection in their glass surface. It looked like another woman walking toward me, one who still believed that decency existed in the world. I did not know that within the next hour, that belief would be tested in ways I had never imagined. And yet, as I reached for the handle, I whispered one more time, "It will be all right." Then I pushed the door open. The smell of polished floors and cold air met me as soon as I entered. The bank was quiet, but not kind of quiet that comforted. It was the kind that reminded you where you did not belong. Everything gleamed: marble counters, chrome rails, glass walls, and I could hear the faint hum of a machine counting money somewhere behind the desks. People lined up neatly in rows. They looked confident, distracted, dressed in neat clothes and holding their phones like shields. I found the end of the line and stood there, clutching my bag close. The queue moved slowly. I could feel the air conditioning against my face, sharp as ice. A man in a navy suit stood behind me, smelling of aftershave and impatience. I shifted my weight and tried not to notice the stares that sometimes found me my old coat, my worn shoes, my trembling hands. When it was finally my turn, I stepped forward and greeted the teller. He was young, maybe 25, his tie too tight, his hair cut short. His smile did not reach his eyes. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound steady. "I am here to pay my property tax." Quote. He glanced at the envelope I placed on the counter, his fingers hesitating before touching it. "You are paying in cash?" "Yes," I answered. "It is all here, counted carefully." He raised an eyebrow. "We do not usually accept large cash payments without documentation. Where did you get this money?" I blinked, unsure I had heard correctly. "It is mine. I saved it." "Of course," he said, his voice slow, condescending. "But we need to verify the source. You understand it is procedure." Quote. The word procedure rolled off his tongue like a weapon. I tried to explain small jobs, sewing, cleaning, but he interrupted. "Do you have pay stubs, receipts?" I shook my head. "No, but it is honest money." He sighed loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Ma'am, anyone can say that. We have to follow rules. You people never seem to understand." The phrase "you people" struck me like a slap. My chest tightened. I felt the eyes of others around me, curious, judgmental, pretending not to listen but listening all the same. A woman in a floral dress behind me shifted uncomfortably. The man in the navy suit looked away. No one spoke. I could feel the warmth leaving my body. My fingers trembled as I pushed the envelope closer. "Please, this is all I have. I just need to pay what I owe." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Maybe you should open an account instead of showing up with cash like this. It looks suspicious." My throat burned. Suspicious? Big amounts? No receipts, no proof. The system flags that. "It is not a big amount," I said softly. "It is the sum of months, small pieces." He chuckled under his breath. "You saved it under your mattress?" The laughter from his lips was quiet but cruel. I wanted to disappear. The floor beneath me seemed to tilt, and I held onto the counter for balance. "I worked for it," I whispered. "Every dollar." He shrugged. "I am not saying you did not. But this is not how civilized transactions are done." Civilized. The word echoed in my head. I wanted to scream that dignity did not come from a bank statement, that worth was not measured in paper or polish. But the word stayed trapped behind the wall of shame rising inside me. He sighed again, impatient. "You need to fill out this form and wait. Maybe someone from compliance can approve it." He pushed a sheet of paper toward me. My eyes blurred as I tried to read it, but the letters swam. I could feel tears pressing against the corners of my eyes. I did not want to cry here, not in front of him, not in front of anyone. My voice cracked. "I just want to pay, please." His tone hardened. "Ma'am, if you cannot provide documentation, I cannot process this. It is that simple." The man in the navy suit behind me sighed loudly. "Can you hurry it up?" I turned slightly, my lips parted to apologize, though I had done nothing wrong. My hand trembled, and one of the bills slid from the envelope, drifting onto the marble floor. No one moved to help. The teller looked down at it and smirked. "You dropped your evidence." Something broke inside me then. I bent down slowly, my knees aching, my vision blurring from humiliation. My fingers touched the floor, cold and spotless, the kind of clean that erased everything human. I reached for the bill, but before I could pick it up, a shadow moved beside me. A hand, large, steady, reached down first and lifted it. I looked up, startled. The hand belonged to a man standing behind me, dressed in a dark suit. His presence filled the space quietly, like a storm you could feel before you saw the lightning. He placed the bill on the counter and looked at the teller. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Apologize to her." The teller blinked, confused. "Sir, The man's tone dropped lower. "You heard me. Apologize." The air in the bank seemed to change. Conversations stopped. The sound of the money counter behind the glass faded. Everyone turned. The teller's mouth opened, but no sound came. His confidence melted under the man's gaze. For a moment, the silence was heavier than any shout could be. I stood frozen, clutching my bag. My heart pounded so loudly that it filled my ears. The man did not look at me. Not yet. His focus stayed on the teller, who finally stammered, I am sorry, ma'am. The man nodded once. Good. Now finish her transaction. The teller obeyed, his hands shaking slightly as he began to count the bills. I could not move. The stranger turned toward me then, his eyes dark, unreadable. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I could only nod. Let us step outside for a moment, he said, and though his voice was gentle, it was not a request. I followed him, still too stunned to think. As the doors closed behind us, the cold morning air met my face. The noise of the city rushed back all at once, traffic, voices, wind, but the world felt changed. The humiliation still burned, but something else was there now. Something unfamiliar. The man reached into his coat and handed me a card. If anyone ever treats you that way again, he said, call me. I looked down at the name printed in clean, bold letters. William Castellano. When I looked up, he was already walking away. His voice lingered in the air, deep and measured, as if he had spoken directly to my fear and silenced it. I did not know it then, but the moment he turned back and met my eyes for the first time would become the point where my life quietly divided into before and after. The sound of the city swallowed us as soon as we stepped outside. The doors of the bank closed behind me with a soft thud, like a seal shutting away everything that had just happened. The sunlight felt colder than before. I could still hear the teller's words echoing in my head, but they were distant now, fading under the weight of what had followed. The man beside me adjusted his coat, glanced toward the street, and said quietly, You should not have had to endure that. Quote. His voice was calm, controlled, but there was something beneath it, a current of anger so measured it almost sounded like care. I looked at him carefully for the first time. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair dark with a few strands of silver near his temples. His expression was composed, but his eyes were sharp, the kind of eyes that noticed everything. Thank you, I said, my voice barely audible. You did not have to interfere. He looked down at me. No one should be treated like that. The way he said it made it sound less like kindness, and more like an order he gave to the world itself. We stood there in silence for a moment. The wind tugged at my scarf. The noise of cars and voices passed around us, but it felt as though we stood outside of time. He finally spoke again. Do you live nearby? Yes, I replied, hesitating. On the south side, near the old market. Let me drive you, he said. Oh, that is not necessary. The bus stop is just... He shook his head gently. You have had enough of public kindness for one day. Let me take you. There was no sharpness in his tone, only certainty. Something about it made refusal feel foolish. I nodded slowly. A black SUV pulled up to the curb almost immediately, as if it had been waiting. The driver stepped out to open the door. Everything happened smoothly, silently, like a well-rehearsed performance. As I climbed in, I could feel the softness of the leather seat, the faint smell of rain and smoke lingering in the air. The door shut with a quiet click, sealing us away from the noise outside. He sat beside me, not too close, his presence filling the small space without words. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The city passed by outside the tinted windows, gray buildings, hurried people, puddles shining like mirrors. I found my voice at last. Do you often come to the bank to rescue strangers? He smiled faintly, but it did not reach his eyes. Only when someone forgets what respect looks like. I should not have caused trouble, I said softly. I am used to being treated that way. It is not your burden to carry. He turned his head slightly. You think standing up for dignity is trouble? The question lingered between us. I looked down at my hands, folded tightly over my bag. I do not know what I think anymore, I whispered. I just wanted to pay what I owe. He nodded once, as if the simplicity of my reason had earned his respect. Then, after a pause, he asked, What is your name? Margaret, I said. Margaret, he repeated slowly, as though tasting the sound of it. A strong name. The way he said it made me shiver, though not from fear. We drove in silence for a while. The streets changed from polished downtown to cracked sidewalks and narrow houses. I felt the shift in air, in color, in how people walked slower here. This is me, I said when we reached the corner near my block. The driver slowed to a stop. I turned toward him. Thank you, Mr. Castellano, for everything. He reached into his coat and handed me a small white card. If you ever need anything, he said, call me, day or night. I took the card. It was thick, expensive paper, the kind that felt heavier than it should. Only his name was printed on it, William Castellano. No title, no company, no address. You are very kind, I murmured. He looked at me for a moment, his gaze unreadable. Kindness has little to do with it. The driver opened the door for me. I stepped out, feeling the wind against my face. The street was quiet, the sky pale with the promise of rain. I turned to thank him again, but the car was already pulling away. I stood there watching it go, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. My reflection glimmered in a puddle by the curb, an old woman holding a white card with a stranger's name, wondering why her heart would not stop racing. I slipped the card into my pocket and looked toward my house at the end of the street. The front porch leaned slightly, and the roses by the fence bent under the coming rain. Everything was the same as it had been that morning. Yet nothing felt the same anymore. As I reached my door, I took out the card again. The paper felt warm, as if it had absorbed the heat of his hand. I whispered his name under my breath, almost without realizing it. William Castellano. The syllables carried a quiet power, the kind that stays with you even when you do not understand why. I placed the card on my kitchen table beside the envelope that now lay empty. For the first time in a long while, I felt something I could not name, a mixture of gratitude and unease, a warmth that was not entirely safe. When the rain finally began to fall, I sat by the window and watched it trace silver lines across the glass. My reflection looked back at me, older, smaller, but somehow awake again. I did not know then that this small act of gratitude would become the beginning of something much larger, something neither of us could ever take back. And before I went to bed that night, I found myself whispering into the quiet house, "Who are you really, Mr. Castellano?" The car moved with a quiet grace, the kind of silence that felt almost rehearsed. The city slid by outside the tinted windows, its noise muffled to a distant hum. I sat with my hands folded over my bag, unsure whether to speak. The driver's eyes stayed forward, and William leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. "You live alone, Margaret?" he asked finally. His tone was gentle but not casual. It was the kind of question that expected an honest answer. "Yes," I said. "For a long time now." "No family?" I hesitated. "My husband passed away 10 years ago. My son moved south. He has his own family now. We talk sometimes." William nodded slowly, his gaze still on the passing streets. "It must be quiet." "It is," I admitted. "Too quiet some days. The house keeps me company. It creaks when the wind blows. I like to imagine it is speaking to me." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something soften his expression. He looked toward me, and a faint smile appeared, not out of politeness, but from recognition. Old houses remember everything, every sound, every word. That is why I prefer them to new ones. They know loyalty. His words lingered in the air, heavy and strange. I studied his face, sharp lines, calm eyes, a man built from control. There was kindness there, but it seemed restrained, guarded, as though it was not meant to be shown too often. "I cannot thank you enough," I said. "What you did back there, it meant more than you think." He shook his head. "Do not thank me. I do not like to see good people humiliated." The way he said good people made me uneasy. "You talk as if you have seen a lot of the other kind." He looked out the window again. "You could say that." We passed under a bridge where sunlight filtered through the cracks in the concrete. The light slid across his face, revealing a scar near his jaw, small, thin, but too precise to be an accident. I wanted to ask about it, but something in me warned not to. So instead I asked, "What do you do, Mr. Castellano?" He paused, almost amused by the question. "Consulting. I help people solve complicated problems." "Sounds important." "It can be," he said quietly. "Sometimes it is about numbers, sometimes about people. Either way, there is always a debt to settle." The word debt echoed in my mind longer than it should have. He noticed my silence. "Do not look so worried," he added lightly. "I am not here to collect anything from you." "I did not think you were." I lied. He smiled faintly again, as if he could see through my words. "You remind me of someone," he said after a moment. "My grandmother." She had the same eyes, calm but not afraid to stare back at the world. "That sounds like a compliment," I said softly. "It is," he answered. "She raised me when no one else would, taught me what respect means, what loyalty costs." Quote. The car turned onto a quieter street. Houses grew smaller, paint chipped, fences bent. It was my part of the city, familiar and honest. He looked around as we drove through. "You have lived here long?" "Almost 40 years," I said proudly. "Every corner here carries a memory." He nodded, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if memorizing them. There was a strange tension in him, not discomfort, but readiness, like a man who had learned to expect danger even in the calm. "I do not understand why you helped me," I said after a pause. "You did not know me." "I did not need to," he said, Sometimes it is enough to see what is wrong and do something about it. The car slowed as we approached my street. My small house waited at the end, leaning slightly under the weight of the years. I pointed. There, that one. The driver pulled up and stopped. William opened his door first, then stepped out to help me, though I insisted I could manage. Still, he offered his arm, and I took it out of politeness. Standing there beside him on the cracked sidewalk, I felt the difference between our worlds more sharply than ever. His suit was spotless, his shoes shining even in the dust. I must have looked like a shadow beside him. "Thank you again," I said quietly. He nodded once. "Keep the card I gave you. Use it if you ever need anything, promise me. I do not want to trouble you." "It would not be trouble," he said. "It would be something different." I frowned slightly. "Different how?" He met my eyes. "You will know if the time comes." A gust of wind passed between us, carrying the faint smell of rain and something else, something metallic, like the echo of the city he carried with him. He turned to go, but stopped after a few steps. "Do you believe in chance, Margaret?" He hesitated. "Sometimes." He nodded. "So do I. Though I have learned that what looks like chance is often someone's choice." Quote. Before I could answer, he got into the car. The door closed with the same quiet click, and the SUV pulled away. I stood watching until it disappeared at the end of the street. The world felt strangely still afterward. The sound of the city seemed distant, the air heavy with something unspoken. I looked down at the card in my hand, his name embossed in dark ink, the number below it like a secret waiting to be used. I slipped it back into my pocket, but it felt like it burned there. For a long time, I stood by the fence, watching the rain begin to fall, thinking of a man who appeared out of nowhere to defend a stranger, and wondering what kind of world produces such a man. That night, when I went to sleep, his voice followed me into my dreams, calm, steady, echoing from somewhere I could not see. And when I woke, I could still hear it, saying softly, "If you ever need anything, call me." 2 weeks passed like a quiet breath. Life slipped back into its small routines. I swept the porch each morning, folded the laundry, fed the stray cat that visited my doorstep. The card with William's name stayed tucked inside the drawer beside my bed. I told myself I would never use it, though sometimes I found my fingers tracing the raised letters as if to be sure it was still real. The neighborhood had begun talking about a charity event downtown, a gala meant to raise funds for the new community center. My friend Clara from the church had asked if I would go. "They want to honor the volunteers," she said. "You have done so much for the soup kitchen. You should be there." I had laughed at first. Me, in a room full of rich people, pretending to belong? But Clara would not take no for an answer. She found me a simple navy blue dress, pressed it with care, and said, "You will look lovely, trust me." That evening, I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from the fabric. My reflection hardly looked like me. The dress hung neatly, my hair pinned up, my hands trembling slightly. I whispered, "Just for one night, Margaret. You can still look like someone who belongs." The taxi dropped me at the entrance of the Whitmore Hotel. The building shimmered in gold light, chandeliers visible through the glass doors. Music drifted from inside the soft rhythm of a piano, and the murmur of hundreds of conversations blending like water. I stepped through the revolving doors and froze. It was beautiful. Tables draped in white linen, crystal glasses glinting under chandeliers, and men in suits that looked sharper than the air itself. I felt like an imposter, an old photograph placed in the wrong frame. Clara waved from across the room. "You made it," she mouthed, her face bright. She led me to our table near the back, filled with volunteers and community workers. Everyone chatted nervously, trying to appear at ease. I sipped my water, letting my eyes wander through the crowd. Then, at the far end of the hall, I saw him. William Castellano. He stood near the stage, speaking with a man in a gray tuxedo. His presence was undeniable, even here among the city's powerful. He wore the same calm composure he had at the bank, that quiet command that drew attention without asking for it. I felt my chest tighten. What was he doing here? A moment later, the host approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice rang clear. "Tonight, we honor the generosity of those who have given their hearts and resources to our community. Please welcome our primary benefactor, Mr. William Castellano." Applause filled the room. My hands froze mid-clap. He walked onto the stage with effortless grace, adjusted the microphone, and spoke in that same measured tone I remembered. "I grew up in this city," he began. "I have seen its beauty and its pain. Tonight is not about me. It is about remembering that we are all responsible for what we choose to ignore." His eyes moved across the crowd, and then, for a heartbeat, they found mine. I forgot to breathe. There was no surprise in his face, only recognition, as if he had expected me. When the speech ended, the applause rose again, but the sound reached me like a distant wave. Clara whispered, "Do you know him?" I have met him once," I murmured. After dinner, guests began to mingle. Waiters drifted between tables with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I tried to keep my attention on Clara's stories, but my thoughts kept circling back to him. Then I heard his voice behind me. "I thought you preferred quieter places." I turned. He was there, smiling faintly, his eyes warm but alert. "I did not expect to see you here," I said. "Nor I you," he replied, "but fate seems to enjoy repetition." Quote. "I was invited for the volunteers' recognition," I said quickly, feeling self-conscious. "And you deserve it," he answered. "You help people. You make this city gentler." His words were simple, but they carried a sincerity that disarmed me. "You seem to know a lot about me," I said softly. He looked at me for a moment before answering. "I make it my business to know the people worth protecting." I frowned. Protecting from what? He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "From the world. It can be unkind to those who still believe in decency." A waiter passed by, and he took 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to me. I hesitated before accepting it. The bubbles caught the light, and for a moment I saw our reflections mingling in the glass, his dark suit, my frail hands. 2 people who should never have crossed paths. The music changed, a slow instrumental melody that wrapped around the room like silk. "May I?" he asked, extending a hand. "I am not much of a dancer," I said, half smiling. He tilted his head slightly. "Neither am I, but perhaps we can pretend." I placed my hand in his. His touch was steady, almost formal, yet there was a gentleness that surprised me. We moved slowly, almost without rhythm, just enough to sway with the music. The world around us blurred voices, lights, laughter, until it felt as if we were alone. "You still have that envelope?" he asked suddenly. I looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "The one from the bank, the money you worked for." "Yes," I said. "It is gone now, paid." "Why?" He shook his head. "No reason. Just a reminder that some debts are heavier than money." The way he said it made me uneasy. His words carried weight I did not understand. Before I could ask more, someone approached him, a man in a black suit, whispering something close to his ear. William's expression changed, the calm replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Excuse me, Margaret," he said. "Duty calls." I nodded. "Of course." He looked at me one last time before turning away. "Enjoy the night. It will not be as peaceful as it seems." Then he was gone into the crowd, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and a swirl of confusion. I stood there, glass in hand, heart pounding. The music carried on, people laughed, but something inside me had shifted. It felt like the air had thickened, charged with something unseen. I sat down again, my gaze drifting toward the stage. The chandelier above shimmered in the reflection of my glass, and for the first time that night, I wished I had not come. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a low warning from the sky. I looked at the tall windows, at the rain beginning to gather, and whispered to myself, "What did you mean, William?" The answer, though silent, was already moving toward me with the storm. The rain had begun to fall outside, a thin curtain of water tracing the tall windows of the ballroom. Inside, the music softened into something slow and sweet. People laughed, glasses clinked, and waiters moved like shadows between the tables. I tried to settle into the rhythm again, though something inside me refused to rest. I kept glancing toward the doors where William had disappeared minutes earlier. The air felt charged, like the stillness before thunder. Clara leaned closer. "You are pale, Margaret. Are you all right?" "I think I just need some air," I said softly, rising from my chair. I made my way toward the hallway, but before I reached it, a sudden crash of glass tore through the music. A scream followed, sharp and real. The band stopped playing. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. 3 men burst through the main doors, faces covered, guns raised. Their shouts filled the air like fire. "Nobody move! Hands where we can see them!" Quote. Someone dropped a tray, and crystal shattered across the floor. Guests screamed, ducking behind tables. My body froze. The sound of my heartbeat was louder than the shouting. One of the men fired a shot into the ceiling. The chandelier trembled and glass rained down like sparks. I crouched low, covering my head. My throat burned from the smell of gunpowder. "Wallets! Jewelry! Phones!" one of them shouted. "Now!" A man near the front tried to reason, his voice shaking. "Please, there's no need for violence." The gunman swung his weapon toward him, silencing him instantly. The room fell quiet again except for the terrified breaths of 100 people. Then, through the chaos, I saw him. William. He emerged from a side corridor, calm, steady, as if the noise belonged to another world. Two men followed him, not security, but something more precise. Their movements were too coordinated, too deliberate. For a moment he simply watched. Then he spoke, his voice cutting through the room like steel. "Put the guns down." The robbers turned toward him. "Stay back," one shouted. William stepped forward slowly, his expression unreadable. The air seemed to tighten around him. "You picked the wrong room," he said. The man raised his gun. One more step and he never finished. In a blur of motion, one of William's men moved from behind a pillar, grabbed the gunman's arm, twisted, and the shot went wide, burying itself in the ceiling. The sound made everyone flinch. Another man rushed forward, but William caught him by the wrist, disarmed him, and struck once clean, controlled, without hesitation. The body hit the ground before anyone could scream. I watched, frozen, as the last of the intruders tried to run. William lifted his gun, I had not even seen him draw it, and fired once. The man dropped. The echo lingered longer than the scream that followed. It was over in seconds. The room was filled with the smell of smoke and fear. People hid their faces, some sobbing, others too stunned to move. William stood in the middle of it all, unshaken. He lowered the gun, handed it to one of his men, and straightened his jacket as if he had simply closed a door. The silence that followed was heavy, unbearable. I wanted to stand, to move, to do something, but my legs refused. I could only stare at him. The man who had defended me at the bank was gone. In his place stood someone else entirely, someone who knew violence the way a pianist knows keys, every note measured, deliberate. The sound of sirens began to rise in the distance. William looked toward the doors, then back at the guests. "You are all safe now," he said quietly. "Stay where you are until the police arrive." His voice was calm, almost kind. But behind that calm was something I could not name, the echo of a world he belonged to, one that operated in shadows. He turned and saw me across the room. For a heartbeat, our eyes met. There was no apology there, no explanation, only the silent acknowledgement of what I had seen. He walked toward me, his shoes clicking softly against the marble. When he reached me, he removed his jacket and placed it gently over my shoulders. "You are shaking," he said. I saw." I could not finish the sentence. He looked at me and his tone softened. "You saw what had to be done." His words were final, unyielding. He guided me toward the exit, past the trembling guests and broken glass. The rain outside had turned heavier, drumming against the sidewalk. As we stepped into the night, the air hit me like ice. He held an umbrella above us, shielding me from the downpour. I could still hear the sirens approaching, growing louder. "You should go," I said. "The police. They will have their version," he replied. "And I will have mine." We stopped beside the waiting car. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Do not be afraid of what you saw, Margaret. The world is not kind to those who hesitate." I wanted to ask who he really was, what kind of man could move through chaos with such calm. But my voice would not come. He opened the car door, gestured for me to sit. "You are safe now," he said. As I stepped inside, I realized how strange it was to feel protected and frightened by the same person. Through the rain-smeared window, I watched him speak briefly with one of his men, then turned toward the flashing lights at the end of the street. His back was straight, his steps deliberate, as though he had already made peace with the storm behind him. I whispered to myself, safe, or owned. The car door closed, and the sound of the rain swallowed the world. The rain was falling harder now, heavy drops striking the pavement with the rhythm of 1,000 heartbeats. Blue and red lights flashed across the wet street, reflecting off puddles like restless ghosts. The sirens had faded, replaced by the steady murmur of voices, the snapping of cameras, the sharp questions of policemen trying to make sense of what had just happened. I stood near the hotel entrance, still wrapped in William's jacket. It was warm against my skin, carrying the faint scent of tobacco and rain. My hands trembled, though I told myself it was just the cold. He was a few feet away, speaking to an officer. His tone was calm, his gestures composed. The officer listened, nodding, glancing occasionally toward the covered bodies being lifted onto stretchers. I could not hear what William said, but whatever it was, it worked. The officer's posture softened, the questions grew shorter. People around us whispered. Some pointed. The volunteers I had come with huddled together, faces pale, eyes darting. No one seemed to know what to do, and yet William moved through it all as if he belonged to the storm itself. After a few minutes, he turned and walked back toward me. His hair was wet, but his expression was the same steady, untouchable. He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm but gentle. "You should go home," he said quietly. I looked at him, still trying to find my voice. "What just happened in there? You killed those men." He nodded once. "They would have killed others. That does not make it right," I whispered. His gaze softened, but only slightly. "Right and wrong are luxuries of peace, Margaret. In chaos there is only survival." His words unsettled me. I wanted to argue, to hold on to the small beliefs that had carried me through life, but standing there in the rain, I realized how little those beliefs mattered to men like him. "I do not understand who you are," I said. "You do not need to," he replied. "Just know that you are safe." He took the edge of his jacket and wrapped it tighter around me. The gesture was strangely intimate, almost tender, and yet it felt like something final, as though he was marking me as someone under his protection, or his control. A flash of lightning cut through the sky, and for a brief second, I saw his face illuminated in stark white light. Calm, resolute, but beneath it something darker, something that did not sleep. The police began directing guests into waiting cars. William guided me through the crowd, shielding me with his arm. When we reached the curb, a black sedan rolled up, its headlights cutting through the rain. He opened the door. "You should rest. You will be called tomorrow to give your statement. Tell them the truth, that you were a guest, that you were frightened, that you saw nothing else." "I saw everything," I said quietly. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Then forget what you saw." "I cannot." "Yes, you can. You are stronger than you think." Quote. His voice was low, coaxing, almost persuasive. For a moment I felt as though the world had narrowed to the space between his words. I wanted to ask if he was afraid of the police, of what people would say, but something told me that fear was not part of his vocabulary. "Will they arrest you?" I asked. He almost smiled. "No, not tonight." I realized then that he was not worried about the law. The law bent around him like rain on glass, visible, but never touching. The driver opened the passenger door for me. William stepped aside, waiting. The air between us was thick with questions neither of us could afford to ask. As I climbed in, he leaned slightly, his voice barely above the sound of the rain. "Get some sleep, Margaret. Tomorrow none of this will seem real." He closed the door gently. Through the window, I watched him step back, the water sliding down his face like lines of light. The police lights painted his silhouette in red and blue, but he did not flinch. The car began to move, pulling away from the hotel. I turned in my seat to look one last time. He stood there under the rain, alone, unbothered, his eyes following until distance turned him into a blur. Inside the car, the noise faded. My hands clutched the lapel of his jacket, still wrapped around me. It felt like armor or a chain. I could not decide which. The driver asked softly, "Home, ma'am?" "Yes," I whispered. As the car glided through the wet streets, I watched the city blur past lights smeared by rain, people hurrying under umbrellas, the endless rhythm of survival. I tried to calm my breath, but the image of him stayed, the way he moved, the way he commanded chaos, and beneath all of that, a truth I did not want to face. I was drawn to him. Not in love, not yet, but in a way that frightened me more, the way darkness draws a moth that mistakes it for warmth. When I reached home, I removed his jacket slowly and hung it on the chair. The smell of rain clung to it, mixed with something I could not name. I poured myself tea, but it tasted of metal and silence. I sat by the window for a long time, listening to the storm. The world outside looked cleaner under the rain, as if it were washing away what had just happened. But inside me, something else was growing a weight that would not leave. Before I went to bed, I looked once more at the jacket. The rain outside had softened to a whisper, and in that stillness I said to myself, "He saved me again." But what kind of man saves people like that? The question lingered through the night, unanswered, steady as the rain that refused to stop. 3 days passed, and the city pretended nothing had happened. The papers called it an attempted robbery foiled by quick security response. They never mentioned William's name. They never mentioned how fast he moved, or how easily death seemed to obey him. I tried to forget, too. I scrubbed the kitchen floor, folded clothes, trimmed the rosebush. Ordinary tasks, small and steady, meant to hold the world together. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every sudden sound, a car door closing. A knock on the wall made my heart jump. The police had called once for a statement. I told them the truth, or at least the version of it that William had asked me to tell. Yes, there were armed men. Yes, I was frightened. No, I did not see who stopped them. It was easier that way. On the 3rd day, the rain stopped. The air smelled clean, but the quiet felt strange, like a pause between breaths. I decided to go to the market, thinking that maybe the noise of people and the smell of fresh fruit would wash the memories away. I walked slowly, my cane tapping the cracked pavement. The sun slipped through the clouds, soft and golden. For a moment, I let myself believe that life could still be normal. I bought apples, a loaf of bread, and a small piece of fish. The grocer greeted me with a smile, as he always did. I smiled back, almost convincing myself I was fine. It was late afternoon when I turned onto my street. The shadows were long, stretching thin across the ground. My house waited at the end, familiar and small, the roses by the fence glistening in the fading light. I was only a few steps away when I heard the low growl of an engine behind me. I turned, frowning. A dark van crawled slowly down the street, its windows tinted, the kind that reflected everything but revealed nothing. My grip on the grocery bag tightened. It was probably just a delivery truck, I told myself. But it stopped beside me. The passenger door opened. 2 men stepped out, heavy boots, black jackets, no words. One of them smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his tone light, almost polite. I froze. "Can I help you?" "You already have," he said. Before I could react, the other man moved behind me. A hand grabbed my arm, another covered my mouth. The groceries spilled onto the ground, apples rolling across the pavement, the bag tearing. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by a cloth pressed against my lips. The world tilted. I felt myself being lifted, dragged. My cane clattered to the ground. I kicked, clawed, fought for breath, but the strength drained from my limbs as fear took over. They shoved me into the van, the door slammed, and the darkness closed in. The air smelled of oil and rubber. I could hear the low hum of the engine starting again. My wrists burned against the rough rope they used to tie me. "Please," I tried to speak, but the words came out muffled, trapped behind the gag. Someone laughed. A harsh sound, too loud in the confined space. "Relax, old lady," a voice said. "We just need you to deliver a message." Tears blurred my vision. I tried to see their faces, but all I could make out was the outline of 3 men, 1 driving, 2 in the back with me. The one closest leaned forward, his breath thick with smoke. "Do you know who you belong to?" he asked. I shook my head desperately. He chuckled. "Of course you don't, but he does." "Who?" I tried to ask, but the gag stopped me. "Castellano," he said, savoring the name. "He took something that wasn't his. We're just evening the debt." The sound of the name hit me like a blow. I struggled harder, shaking my head, trying to tell them I wasn't part of any of this. But my words were useless, lost in the roar of the road. The van swerved onto a narrower path, leaving behind the familiar hum of the city. I could feel the bumps beneath the tires, gravel now, not pavement. The light through the cracks of the windows grew dimmer until there was nothing left but darkness. The man sitting across from me leaned forward again, the glow of his cigarette briefly revealing his face. A scar ran from his jaw to his ear. His smile was cruel. "You tell your friend when you see him that Gordano says hello." Quote. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it, the satisfaction, the hunger told me it meant everything to William. The van stopped suddenly. The door slid open, and cold air rushed in. I heard distant waves, the faint cry of seagulls. The smell of salt and rust filled my lungs. A warehouse, maybe, near the docks. They dragged me out. My shoes scraped against the ground. Inside, the air was thick with damp and gasoline. Somewhere nearby, metal chains rattled softly. They tied me to a chair. The rope bit into my wrists. One of them removed the gag, and I gasped for air, coughing. "Please," I whispered. "I don't know anything. I'm nobody." The scarred man crouched in front of me. His eyes were cold, unblinking. "That's what makes you perfect," he said. "You matter to him, and he knows it. Everyone who matters to him eventually suffers." I shook my head. "You're wrong. I barely know him." He grinned. "Then you won't be missed for a while." Quote. He stood, walked away, and spoke to the others. I caught fragments of their conversation. Bait, message, tonight. The sound of footsteps faded until there was only the echo of dripping water and the low rumble of the ocean outside. I sat in the darkness, my breath shallow, my heart beating too fast. Fear came in waves, but beneath it, something else stirred, a strange, fragile trust that he would come. I didn't know why. Maybe because he always had. The thought frightened me as much as it comforted me. And then, from somewhere deep in the warehouse, I heard one of the men laugh and say, "He'll come for her. He always does." They all laughed after that. I closed my eyes and whispered his name into the dark, hoping that somehow, Wherever he was, he would hear it. William. The sound came first, the low, distant growl of engines cutting through the wind. I lifted my head from where it hung against my chest, my neck stiff, my wrists raw from the ropes. The men had grown restless, pacing near the door. One of them checked his watch. Another loaded a gun. Something had changed in the air. Even before I heard the first shot, I knew he was coming. The lights above flickered once, then again. The hum of electricity seemed to stutter, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Then the noise hit sharp, metallic, close. The door burst open, and the night came with it. Gunfire ripped through the darkness. Shouts followed. The men scrambled, their bravado replaced by panic. I ducked instinctively, the chair creaking beneath me. Sparks lit the air where bullets struck metal. "Who the hell?" one of them shouted, but his words ended in a sound that was not a word at all. Through the haze of gun smoke and broken light, I saw him. William. He moved like something inevitable, silent, efficient, terrifyingly calm. His face was half shadow, half firelight, the glint of his weapon catching with every movement. Behind him, his men spread out, swift and wordless, each motion a part of a deadly rhythm. Giordano appeared from behind a stack of crates, his voice sharp with fury. "Castellano!" William turned toward him, lowering his weapon slightly. "You should have stayed out of this," he said. Giordano sneered. "You took what was mine. Now I take what is yours." William's jaw tightened. "You made your choice." They fired at the same time. The sound was deafening, a storm trapped inside walls. I closed my eyes, pressing myself against the chair, praying for it to end. When I opened them, Giordano was on the ground, his hand clutching his chest, his breath gurgling out like broken glass. William walked toward him slowly, eyes cold. "You don't touch what's mine." Quote. The last word hung heavy in the air. Not possession, but warning. He turned then, scanning the room. His gaze found me in the corner, tied and trembling. For the first time that night, something broke through his composure. He crossed the floor in 3 strides, knelt beside me, and cut through the ropes with a knife. I gasped as the blood rushed back into my hands. He caught me before I could fall. "Margaret," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I looked up at him through the haze of smoke and tears. "You came." "Of course I came." His words were simple, but there was something in the way he said them, not pride, not comfort, but a promise kept at a cost he never intended to pay. He helped me to my feet, steadying me. I could feel the tremor in his hands despite his calm. Behind us, his men checked the area, gathering weapons, speaking into radios. The warehouse smelled of gunpowder and salt, the sea whispering just beyond the walls. "We need to move," one of them said. "Cops will be here in 10. William nodded. "Get the car." He turned to me again. "Can you walk?" "I think so," I said, though my legs disagreed. He didn't argue. Without a word, he slipped an arm under my knees and another behind my back, lifting me as if I weighed nothing. My hands instinctively gripped his shoulders. "William," I whispered, my voice breaking. They said you'd come for me. They knew." His eyes darkened. "They used you to get to me." "Why? Who are they?" He looked ahead, not answering. The flicker of emergency lights from outside painted his face red, then blue. "Old debts," he said quietly. "Ones that never really die." We stepped into the night. The rain had stopped, but the air was still wet, the ground slick under his shoes. Smoke drifted from the broken doorway, curling into the cold air like something unholy. The black sedan waited with the engine running. One of his men opened the back door. William set me down gently inside, his hands lingering for a second longer than necessary, as if making sure I was real. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Only scared," I whispered. "Fear is proof you're alive," he said softly. "Hold on to it. It's the only honest thing left." He closed the door, walked around to the other side, and got in beside me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The car began to move, leaving behind the faint orange glow of the burning warehouse. I looked at him, his profile lit by the streetlights as we passed. There was blood on his sleeve, though I couldn't tell if it was his. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the road ahead. "William," I said quietly, "you killed for me." He didn't look at me. "I killed because they made me choose." "What did they want?" He turned his head slightly. "You, because they knew what I protect." I shook my head. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. The words were both comfort and warning. When the car stopped outside a tall iron gate overlooking the sea, he stepped out first, motioning for me to follow. The gate opened silently, and the car rolled into a wide driveway lined with dark trees. At the end stood a house not grand, but guarded, with lights glowing faintly behind drawn curtains. He helped me out, his hand warm against mine. "You'll rest here tonight," he said. "No one will find you." I looked up at the house, then back at him. "What will you do?" He met my eyes. "What I always do. End what needs ending." The wind from the ocean carried the scent of salt and iron. He turned toward the horizon, where the faint glow of the city still shimmered. For a moment he looked almost human, tired, burdened, but alive. Then he said quietly, "You should not have been part of this. But now that you are, I will not let them touch you again." Something inside me broke, then fear, relief, gratitude, I could not tell. My voice trembled when I spoke. "Why William? Why me?" He looked at me, and for the first time his eyes softened completely. "Because," he said, "you remind me of what I used to believe in." The sea roared below, drowning the silence that followed. He turned to the driver. "Take her inside." Quote. As the door closed behind me, the sound of the ocean faded, but his last words stayed, echoing in my chest like a heartbeat I could not silence. Morning came slowly, as if it was unsure whether it should return to a house that had seen blood the night before. I woke to the sound of waves breaking against stone, steady and distant. The room smelled of salt and antiseptic. White curtains swayed with the wind, soft as breath. For a moment I didn't remember where I was. Then I saw the coat hanging on the chair, his coat and memory returned like a tide. My wrists were bandaged where the ropes had cut into my skin. My body ached, but the pain felt almost like proof that I was still here. I sat up carefully. Someone had left a tray of breakfast on the table, tea, toast, and a bowl of fruit. I wasn't hungry. The door opened quietly. William stepped in, dressed simply in a black shirt, sleeves rolled. There were faint shadows under his eyes, and for the first time, he looked human, tired. Older, less made of stone. "You should eat something," he said. "I will," I answered, though I didn't move. He walked to the window and stood looking out toward the sea. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with things that refused to stay unspoken. Finally, I said, "You can tell me now." He turned. "Tell you what?" "The truth. Who you are. What all this is." He studied me for a moment, then sat in the chair across from me. "You already know part of it. I know what you can do," I said quietly, "but not what you are." He exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together, as though deciding how much truth the morning could bear. "My name is William Castellano. You know that. What you don't know is that the name belongs to something larger than me, a family, an empire built from things the law doesn't forgive." Quote. I listened without speaking. He continued, his voice calm but stripped of the smooth control I had always heard. "For years I ran what my father built. Money, power. People who obey because they fear. I told myself it was necessary, that the world was cruel, that order required someone willing to be worse than the chaos." He looked at his hands, then back at me. "I was wrong. I became the chaos." I said nothing. He leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the waves. "You asked me once why I helped you. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe I wanted to feel clean again, just once. Maybe I wanted to see if decency could still exist near me without dying." The words hung between us. They sounded rehearsed and raw, at the same time the confession of a man unused to being honest. "You saved me twice," I said softly. "And yet you speak as if you've done nothing worth keeping." He gave a faint smile. "Saving one person doesn't erase what I've done to others." Quote. "No," I said, "but it means you remember how to choose differently." He looked at me, almost startled. "You think it's that simple?" "It never is," I replied, "but it starts that simple." He was silent for a long moment. The sound of the sea filled the space between us, steady and indifferent. "When I walked into that bank," I said, "I thought the world had already decided who I was, an old woman with nothing left. Then you appeared, and for a moment I saw the world pause. You have the kind of power that can destroy or protect. You decide every day which one it will be." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And what if I can't undo what I've already chosen? Then stop pretending you're the only one who can't change." He looked away, his jaw tight. Outside, gulls cried above the water. The light shifted, falling across his face, softening it. "I could move you somewhere safe," he said. "Someplace quiet, where no one will ever find you. You would never have to think of any of this again." I shook my head. "Safety is not what I need." "Then what do you need?" "The truth," I said. "And for you to live with it, not hide behind it." He studied me carefully, as if trying to decide whether I was brave or foolish. The truth is ugly. So is fear, I answered. But people live with that every day. Quote. Something changed in his eyes then, not warmth, not relief, but the faint spark of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He stood and walked to the window again. You could leave right now, he said. The car will take you anywhere you want. You never have to see me again. I rose slowly from the bed, my body still weak, but steady enough to stand. If I leave, I said, nothing will change. You will keep building walls around yourself and call it protection. Quote. He turned, surprised by the firmness in my voice. I stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. I'm not staying because I forgive you, I said. I'm staying because I believe people like you can still do something right before it's too late. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. I don't deserve that kind of faith, he said quietly. None of us do, I replied. That's what makes it worth giving. Quote. For a moment, the only sound was the sea, the waves breaking against rock as if the world outside our words was reminding us that time keeps moving. He looked down, his voice almost a whisper. You should rest. Tomorrow, I'll take you home. I nodded. And what will you do? His answer was slow, deliberate. I'll start something different. Maybe build something that doesn't need fear to stand. I believed him not completely, but enough to let silence finish what neither of us could. He walked to the door, paused, and said without turning, Thank you, Margaret, for not looking away. When he left, I sat beside the window, watching the waves roll and break. The sky was brighter now, the morning steady. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or whether the world could change a man like him, but for the first time I felt that he wanted to try. And that, I thought, was enough for now. A month later, the city was dressed in sunlight again. The winter rains had faded into memory, leaving the air clean, the streets damp with the smell of new beginnings. I stood in front of the new community center, the Hope House, a modest building of pale stone and wide windows. The morning breeze carried the sound of children laughing somewhere down the block. The ribbon stretched across the entrance gleamed red against the light. A small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, volunteers, city officials. Someone handed me a pair of silver scissors wrapped in white ribbon. My hands trembled as I took them. Mrs. Margaret, the mayor said, smiling. You've done so much for this neighborhood. It's only right you do the honors. I nodded, though my heart was somewhere else. As the ribbon fluttered to the ground, applause filled the air. I smiled, but it felt quiet inside me. The noise was distant, softened by a memory that lived behind the moment, the sound of waves. A voice saying, You should rest. Tomorrow, I'll take you home. After the ceremony, people began to wander through the building, children running ahead, their laughter echoing through the new halls. I followed slowly, my cane tapping softly on the polished floor. The air smelled of paint and hope. In the main hall, a plaque had been placed on the wall. I stepped closer, reading the engraved words. The Hope House, founded through the generosity of the Castellano Foundation for those who still believe kindness can rebuild what power once destroyed. My breath caught. The letters were clean and steady, like the handwriting on a card I still kept in my drawer. William had kept his promise. I stood there a long while, watching sunlight pour across the plaque. I could almost hear his voice again, calm and certain. Build something that doesn't need fear to stand. People passed behind me, their footsteps light. Clara appeared beside me, her smile bright. Isn't it wonderful? They say the man who funded it never gave his full name. Just a foundation. Whoever he is, God bless him. I smiled faintly. Yes, I said. God bless him. Outside, a group of children were planting small trees along the sidewalk. Their laughter carried through the open door, filling the hall with something larger than sound, something alive. I walked out into the sunlight, blinking against the warmth. Across the street, near a black car parked under a row of trees, stood a man in a dark suit. He didn't move. He didn't need to. I knew it was him. Even from that distance, I could feel the same quiet certainty that had followed him everywhere. He watched the children, not me, hands in his pockets, the wind brushing his hair back. For a brief moment, the noise of the city disappeared. It was just the two of us, separated by space and by everything that had passed between. I nodded once. He nodded back. No words. None were needed. He turned, spoke to the driver, and the car pulled away. I watched until it disappeared around the corner, swallowed by the world that had always belonged to him. Then I looked back at the children, and the building behind them, the center now filled with laughter. There was no triumph in me, only a quiet peace. the kind that arrives when something long unfinished finally rests. I sat on the bench near the garden, listening to the sound of wind through new leaves. My hands rested on my cane. The sunlight reached across the street, warming my skin. I thought of all that had happened, the humiliation, the fear, the rain, the warehouse, the sea. It all felt distant now, as if it had happened to someone else. But his voice lingered still, not as a shadow, but as a memory that no longer hurt. I whispered. Maybe we both found a way to start again. A cloud passed over the sun, and a few drops of rain began to fall, soft, steady, familiar. Children laughed and ran beneath it, their small feet splashing in puddles. I smiled, lifting my face to the sky. The rain felt gentle, like forgiveness. Not the kind that erases, but the kind that allows life to go on. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of it carry me back to that first morning when I had left my house with a paper envelope and a prayer that the day would be kind. It hadn't been kind. It had been something far more important. It had been true. And now, under this rain, I finally believed that truth could be enough.